All right, let's talk about how to use a hammer drill. As you know, a hammer drill is a combination of pistol drill with a hammering motion. So we'll get into that in a second. But the first thing I want to do is I want to inspect my tool to make sure it's actually usable. I'm going to check my cord, like in any power tool, to make sure it's not torn or frayed. I'm also this time making sure it's not plugged in. Because like any tool, any power tool, before you do anything with it outside of using it, if you have to inspect it, something breaks, something tears up, something jams, the first thing you do is disconnect the power source. And in our case, it's 120 volts of alternating current that actually has a grounded plug on it. And that helps prevent electrical shock for you, that you don't become part of the circuit. A long time ago, tools were made completely out of metal, and it wasn't unusual for a wire to get loose and reach over and touch the side on the inside of the housing. And when you had your hand on it, you get quite a good tickle from it. I'm also going to check my housing, specifically looking to make sure somebody hadn't rocked it, something's not cracked or torn up, everything's in working order. Make sure I play with my trigger, make sure everything works. Then I can adjust my handle if I need to. So I'm ready. Now the first part I'm going to do when I use this is to use PPE. I'm going to make sure I got safety glasses, because sometimes these things can throw some chips. But I've got an additional piece of PPE that you're going to need, and it's a set of earmuffs. When you're using the hammer function of this thing, it's as loud as a screaming banshee. And you do it very long, it's going to give you a pretty good headache. So you will wear earmuffs when you use this tool. All right. Now I'm down to selecting and installing my bit. In this case, we're using the masonry bit. And if you look at the tip on it really close, right there, it's actually got a little extra piece of carbide. It looks like a house top on it. And it's designed to take that punishment of the bit pounding into the concrete. A regular twist bit won't take that punishment. Tungsten carbide is it's the second hardest metal that I personally know of, and that's one of the ways to quickly identify a masonry bit. It has more of an auger type than it does a twist, because it's designed as a twist to actually pull the material away from the tip so that it doesn't build up, and it keeps a clean surface area for them to pound on. So I'm gonna get out my chuck key, which is down here at the base of the handle. And this one's a little more heavy duty, a little bit longer. It's got a short piece, a long piece, and it's designed to hold like this, where your thumb is on the short piece. I'm going to start out by just simply hand turning the chuck till the jaws come out pretty close, and I'm going to work to make sure that bit is lined up as perfectly in there as I can. I don't want it lean over to one side. It'll lock in place like that, and it's just not going to work. So you want to take a second to make sure your bit's lined up pretty good. I'm going to take the teat on my key into the hole in the gear, and I'm going to start tightening it. And I'm actually going to tighten down just as hard as I can. These bits have a tendency to want to slip. And if you notice there, when I was tightening, you see the head jump on the drill a little bit? That's what it has in the hammer function. A regular pistol drill doesn't have that. Put my key back in place. Now I've got to set my depth on this thing. And if you notice on the head, if I hit the release, a little piece of guide here comes out and sticks out here at the end. And I'm going to back it up roughly about an inch or so. I'm just going to eyeball it, wiggle it to make sure it seats itself, because it will pop out. Make sure I'm in forward. Select my speed. I have a 1 and a 2, and with a smaller bit, anything say smaller than 3/8 of an inch, I'm going to keep it on a 2. When I get my bigger bits, I'm going to slow it down a little bit. I'm going to select my function and turn it over, make sure it's turned to hammer, which it is. Now when I begin, I'm actually going to turn it over to one side and drill a little bit so you can hear what it sounds like when it's not in the hammer function versus when it is. And you can distinctly tell the difference. You'll know if you're doing the right thing or not. These smaller bits with this soft concrete will drill through even in the regular drill function, but what you end up doing is creating a lot of friction on the end of this bit, and they'll actually burn off and melt because they're just welded in place. The carbide's not going to melt, but the weld will melt, and a little bit piece will fall out of the end of it. All right, take my cord, plug it in, lining up the ground tong. Mark the spot where I want to drill, and I'm going to start slow. And you see, I'm going to use 2 fingers. I'm going to ease into the trigger and start slow to build up speed. And the reason you start slow is the harder and the flatter and shinier the surface you work on, when you hit a bit, as it starts spinning, it's going to want to walk off. And bits, a lot of times, especially on metal or glass, will start just turning circles on you, and they won't start where you want. So you always start a little bit slower to get it started. And you'll hear that, and you'll hear it when it starts actually hammering and working better. So normally I would start the hammer function, but for demonstration, I'm going to start here in the regular drill function. I'm going to drill just a second so you can hear it. sounds like a regular drill. Now I'm going to change this selector over to the hammer only function. I felt the head just drop. And I'm going to drill down until I hit my depth gauge, and I'm going to pull it back out. And you'll hear the sound difference. All right, I'm going to make sure I unplug it. Now I can take my bit out. Get it started and loosen it by hand. A lot of times these bits are going to be really hot if you used it for a while. So a lot of times I won't even touch it. I'll just shake it out to get it out and make sure I don't burn myself, because they can get smoking red hot. Reinstall my chuck key. Now I'm going to do a little maintenance on this thing, post-use maintenance. I'm going to make sure everything's clean and dry, really paying attention to these vents, because they're important. This thing generates a lot of heat. If you use it for a while, you put your hand up here and touch it, you can burn yourself. This gets really hot at times. So I'm going to make sure everything's solid, make sure everything's clean and everything's dry. I'm going to check my bit again, because a lot of times by now it's cooled off a little bit. A lot of times I've had these tips melt off. And I'm going to look at it, make sure there's still enough left of it that I can use it again. I'm going to roll it a little bit, make sure I didn't warp it. Because a lot of times when you're drilling with this thing, if you're not careful, you got to put some pressure behind it. But if you push too much, the bit will start flexing when it starts to spin. And what they're literally going to do is you're going to break it in half, and you're going to leave a piece stuck inside your wall, and you won't be able to get it out, because it's going to be dug down in there. And these smaller ones are really easy to break. If you go to push it just so hard, if you're just pushing, it'll really bend that bend. You got to find that balance between putting enough pressure on it so that you don't flex it very much, but have enough that the hammer function will work and it'll go through. That's how to use a hammer drill.